You probably looked at your bank account today, and you probably stressed about the cost of groceries, or maybe like you worried about your kids' grades,
Right.
or felt your blood pressure spike over some, stressful deadline at work. But what if the scarcity of that money and the grading system at that school, and even like the fundamental concept of time governing that deadline,
Mhm.
what if all of that was just a deliberately engineered illusion? Like, what if everything you interact with daily is just a carefully constructed cage designed to keep you running on a treadmill?
It is it's a profoundly unsettling thought, honestly,
Oh,
because, we are taught to view the world as this series of concrete facts.
exactly.
We completely believe that our institutions like science, banking, education, we think they're built on these bedrock truths. But the massive stack of university lecture transcripts we're diving into today, well, it kind of takes a sledgehammer to that bedrock.
And when I say a sledgehammer, I mean it shatters everything. And just to be clear, the mission of this deep dive isn't to ask you to just, blindly accept everything these lectures propose as undeniable gospel.
Right, definitely not.
We're using this material as uh, a radical exercise in critical thinking. We're going to put on a completely different set of lenses and look at the hidden architecture of power and reality and money and even religion from a really subversive angle.
And by the time we finish, the goal is really for you to understand the mechanics of this proposed reality.
Yeah.
We aren't just going to list wild theories. We're going to examine the exact mechanisms, the how and the why of how human imagination is supposedly captured and commodified and controlled.
So understand how power controls the world. We actually have to start with how we perceive the world.
Mhm.
And these lectures kick off by dragging us all the way back to the 18th century.
To Immanuel Kant.
Right. To Kant. Now, I always thought of philosophy as just, guys in powdered wigs debating things that don't really matter. But this framework insists that Kant holds the key to this whole illusion.
He really does, yeah. Because Kant fundamentally challenged the arrogance of human perception, I guess you could say.
Okay.
Well, before Kant, the general assumption was basically that our eyes and our ears give us an accurate picture of the universe.
Hmm.
Like what you see is what is actually there.
Which makes sense, right? That's how we all operate.
Sure. But Kant argued that this is entirely false. He divided existence into two categories. First, there is the noumena.
Noumena, okay.
Yeah, and this is objective reality, like the actual raw, unfiltered data of the universe, the things in themselves completely independent of us looking at them.
So the universe as it actually is without human eyeballs involved.
Exactly. But here's Kant's devastating realization. He said humans have absolutely zero access to the noumena. We can never know true reality.
Wait, never. Why not?
Because we are completely trapped inside our biology. We experience the world exclusively through our sensory organs, our eyes, our ears, our nervous system.
Right.
And these organs don't just passively receive reality like an open window. They actively filter and warp and translate that raw data into a format that our specific human brains can actually comprehend.
Oh, wow.
And Kant called this process, translated version of reality, the phenomena.
Let me make sure I'm grasping the scale of this. Are we talking about something like color blindness, where someone literally cannot see the color red, so for them red just doesn't exist in their reality?
It is much deeper than that, actually.
Oh.
But that's a perfect stepping stone. Think about a bat, right?
Okay.
A bat navigates the world through echolocation. It perceives physical space as this symphony of bouncing sound waves. A bat's phenomena, its experienced reality, is radically different from ours.
Yeah, that makes sense. They're seeing with sound.
Right. Or consider a mantis shrimp. A mantis shrimp has 16 color receptive cones in its eyes. Humans only have 3.
Wait, really? 16?
Yes. So the mantis shrimp sees a literal rainbow of colors that human brains literally cannot even conceive of. So the question is, which reality is the true reality? The humans, the bats, or the shrimps?
I mean, none of them, right? They're all just biological translations.
Exactly. But Kant takes it one massive step further, and this is where the lectures really anchor their entire theory of power.
Okay, I'm ready.
It's not just colors and sounds that are translations. Kant argued that space and time themselves do not exist out there in the objective universe.
Whoa, whoa. I have to stop you right there. Time and space aren't real.
That's what he argued.
But I have a physical clock ticking on my wall, and, I drove 5 physical miles to get to the studio today. How can these lectures possibly claim that distance and time are just in my imagination?
It's a trip, I know. But think of time and space not as like external containers that we live inside of. Think of them as the internal software your brain uses to render the data.
Okay, software, like on a computer.
Yes, exactly. Imagine a computer processing raw lines of code. To make that code understandable to a human user, the computer creates a graphical interface. Folders, a desktop, little trash can icon.
Right, the GUI.
Right. Those folders don't physically exist inside the silicon microchip. They're just a visualization tool. According to this framework, time and space are just the graphical user interface of the human mind.
Oh my gosh.
They are cognitive structures that we project onto the raw data of the universe, so we just don't go mad from sensory overload.
So, if space and time are just the software our brains use to organize all this chaos, then reality as we experience it is literally a constant, ongoing act of imagination. Like, we are generating our world second by second.
Yes, we are. And if you accept that reality is imagined, you immediately run into a massive collision with modern science.
Right, because the entire scientific worldview is predicated on the exact opposite assumption, isn't it? The idea that we can measure and quantify and master an objective external reality using tools and math.
Exactly. Which brings us to the lecture's blistering critique of the scientific method. The framework argues that because science refuses to acknowledge Kant's premise,
Because they insist the universe is this random material place building from the bottom up.
right, and because they insist on that, they have developed massive, embarrassing blind spots. And honestly, my favorite example from the source material is the takedown of dark energy.
Yes. Oh, I love this part. This is where it gets so crazy.
So the cosmological model of the Big Bang is actually a perfect illustration of a paradigm that is desperately trying to save itself. We are all taught that the universe exploded into existence from a single point, right? And it's been expanding ever since.
Right, like blowing up a balloon. Everything stretches out evenly.
But as our telescopes got better, astronomers noticed a fatal flaw in the math. The expansion isn't even at all. Some galaxies are moving away from us at speeds that completely violate the established models of physics.
They're moving too fast.
Way too fast. The universe appears to be expanding faster and faster, rather than slowing down. The math simply did not work. So the foundational theory of modern cosmology was basically on the verge of collapsing.
And this is where the mathematical cheat code comes in. Because instead of scientists saying, wow, our entire model of a bottom-up material universe is fundamentally wrong, cosmologists just invented something out of thin air to balance the equation.
They did. They called it dark energy.
Dark energy.
They hypothesized this invisible, undetectable, unmeasurable force that supposedly makes up like roughly 70 to 80% of the entire universe.
I am still reeling from the audacity of this, honestly. Like, if I'm sitting in a high school algebra class and the test asks what 1987 plus 25 is, and I write down 20.
The teacher fails you.
Exactly. The teacher marks it wrong. But what if I just look at the teacher with a straight face and say, oh, I'm sorry, you forgot to factor in my dark energy. It's totally invisible, we can't measure it, but I promise it makes my math work out perfectly.
You'd be sent to the principal's office.
I would. But when astrophysicists do it, they get Nobel Prizes. It's wild.
It is wild.
Yeah.
But it highlights a really important sociological truth about science that these lectures emphasize. Paradigms rarely die willingly.
No, they don't.
So the lectures ask a very uncomfortable question. Where did hundreds of thousands of years of human consciousness go? Did we really just sit in caves, staring at the wall for 2,000 centuries, before suddenly waking up one day and deciding to build the pyramids?
It's a massive black hole in our timeline. And then, there's the diversity issue. If random mutation and adaptation are the sole drivers of life on Earth, why are we the only ones left?
Exactly.
You look at dogs or birds, and there are thousands of wild variations perfectly adapted to specific niches. So why aren't there humans with gills who adapted to live purely in the ocean? Why aren't there distinct, separate species of humans roaming the Earth today? We just magically bottlenecked into this one specific homogeneous form.
And the lectures suggest these gaps exist because science insists that matter creates consciousness. They think that atoms randomly bump into each other, they form cells, those cells form brains, and then miraculously, a subjective experience just sparks into existence.
But this framework violently flips that sequence.
It does. It proposes that consciousness is not a byproduct of the brain. Instead, the mind creates matter.
So the brain doesn't generate the mind. The brain is just like an antenna tuning into a consciousness that already exists out there.
Precisely. Consider neuroscience. Despite mapping the brain in incredible detail, Science cannot pinpoint where a memory actually
That's
lives.
true. They can't.
They can see a region light up on an MRI when you speak, or when you feel fear. But if I ask you to remember your 10th birthday, they cannot find the specific cluster of neurons holding that video file. The memory is seemingly nowhere and everywhere at the same time.
And the lectures use a really brilliant, relatable example to hammer this home. Babies.
Oh yes, the baby example.
Right. If the scientific materialist view is correct that we are just meat computers waiting to be programmed by sensory input, then a newborn baby should be a total blank slate.
Absolutely blank.
But anyone who has ever spent time around newborns knows that is completely false. They arrive in this world fully loaded with distinct idiosyncratic personalities. Like, one baby is anxious, one is calm, one is super observant right from day one. If the environment hasn't shaped them yet, where does that complex personality come from?
The material suggests it comes from a pre-existing consciousness.
Yeah.
And this brings us to the ultimate myth that the lectures want to dismantle, and that is the scientific method as a tool for actual discovery.
Oh, yeah. We all learned this in middle school. Step 1, observe. Step 2, form a hypothesis. Step 3, run an experiment. Step 4, analyze the data.
The classic scientific method.
Right. It's presented as this cold, logical, robotic staircase to truth.
But the reality of historical genius tells a completely different story. True, paradigm-shifting discovery almost never happens via the scientific method. The lectures argue that the most profound breakthroughs arrive via intuition, dreams, and sudden flashes of insight that feel almost, well, supernatural.
Look at Einstein. He wasn't grinding away in a sterile laboratory, running double-blind trials to discover the theory of relativity.
No, he wasn't.
He was working a mundane job as a clerk in a patent office in Bern, Switzerland. He was literally daydreaming, looking out a window, visualizing, riding alongside a beam of light, and the concept of relativity just, downloaded into his brain.
Or James Watson, who co-discovered the double helix structure of DNA. He didn't find it by staring through a microscope and piecing it together atom by atom. He was stuck for months.
Right.
Until he literally had a dream about two intertwined spiral staircases. The architecture of life was revealed to him in his sleep.
And the lecturer, who is a writer, talks about how this works for artists, too. You don't sit down and logically calculate a beautiful melody or a profound novel. You go for a walk in the park, or you lie awake in bed, and the idea just hits you. It feels like you are channeling something outside of yourself.
So what is the scientific method, then, if it doesn't discover anything?
Right, what is it?
The lectures argue it is merely a public relations tool. It is the language you must use after you have your divine intuition in order to explain it to a society that demands logical, step-by-step proof. You reverse engineer the experiment to validate the dream you already had.
Okay, so if we take all of this Kant's phenomena, the blind spots of the Big Bang, the mind preceding matter, and intuition driving discovery, what is the ultimate takeaway for you, the listener? Why spend so much time deconstructing how we know things?
Because it establishes the foundational rule of human power. If science doesn't have all the objective answers, and if reality is essentially a projection of our collective imagination, then the ultimate form of power isn't physical force.
It's not armies.
No. The ultimate form of power is the ability to dictate what people imagine. Whoever controls the boundaries of your imagination controls the parameters of your reality.
Which is the perfect pivot, because if you want to capture the human imagination, if you want to force billions of people to imagine the exact same reality every single day, what is the most powerful tool ever invented to do that? Money. Let's transition into the mechanics of that control. The alchemy of money and the deliberate engineering of artificial scarcity.
This is where the framework gets really practical.
Yeah, this part of the material fundamentally broke my brain. Because we all walk around believing money is a finite resource, right? Like water in a desert. You have to trade hours of your irreplaceable life just to get a few drops of it. But the lectures detail how money is literally infinite. And the scarcity we feel in our bones is completely manufactured.
To truly grasp the scale of this illusion, the framework requires us to examine the historical mechanics of banking. We have to go back to the origin of paper money.
Okay, set the scene.
Originally, commerce was conducted with physical gold and silver. But gold is incredibly heavy. It's vulnerable to theft, and traveling with it across continents was a logistical nightmare for merchants.
So early merchants started looking for a workaround, and they found early bankers who had heavily guarded vaults. The merchant would deposit a heavy chest of gold, and the banker would give them a piece of parchment, a promissory note, a receipt, basically, that said, the bearer of this paper is entitled to one chest of gold.
And very quickly, merchants realized it was infinitely more efficient to just hand the paper receipt to each other to settle debts rather than constantly going back to the vault to move the physical metal.
Right, the paper became the money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then the banker has an epiphany. And this is the exact moment the world changes.
Oh, this is the magic trick.
Yes. The banker looks in his vault and realizes something crucial. The gold just sits there. The merchants almost never come to withdraw their physical gold at the exact same time.
So this realization birthed the concept of fractional reserve banking.
Let's walk through the math of how wealth is created from nothing. Imagine a community deposits 10,000 pounds of gold in a vault. The banker knows historically that only about 10% of the depositors will ask for their gold on any given day.
So the banker thinks, I have 10,000 pounds of gold sitting here doing absolutely nothing. A local lord comes in and needs money to build a bridge. I don't need to give him my actual gold. I can just write him a new batch of paper receipts creating a loan and charge him interest.
Exactly. The banker issues another 10,000 pounds worth of paper receipts to the lord. Suddenly, there are 20,000 pounds worth of paper circulating in the economy, but still only 10,000 pounds of actual gold in the vault.
They doubled the money supply.
Out of thin air, simply by writing a contract.
It is the closest thing to actual magic in the human world. It defies the basic logic of physics. Like, if I give you my car, I don't have a car anymore. But in banking, if I deposit my money, the bank can lend that same money to someone else, and we both think we have the money.
And this is an ancient history. This is exactly how the modern global economy operates today, just with digital numbers on a screen instead of paper receipts.
Yeah.
The lectures point to the explosive growth of modern China as the ultimate proof of this infinite money mechanism. Over the last 2 decades, Chinese state banks have financed the largest infrastructure boom in human history.
Entire megacities, networks of high-speed rail, sprawling airports.
Right. And did they do that because the Chinese government saved up trillions of tax dollars in a giant piggy bank? No. The central banks literally typed zeros into a computer. They manifested the money from the ether to pay the construction companies, to pay the workers, to buy the steel. The money is infinite.
But this infinite money glitch historically carried a fatal risk for the bankers, didn't it? The bank run.
Yes, the bank run was their greatest fear. If a rumor started that the bank had issued too many paper receipts, panic would set in. Every merchant holding a paper note would rush to the vault at the exact same time to demand their physical gold. Since the bank only held a fraction of the gold, it would instantly collapse.
Or, even more dangerous, what if the banker lent massive amounts of paper money to a king to fight a war and the king lost? Or what if the king won but just looked at the banker and said, I have the army, I'm not paying you back, go ahead and try to collect?
To insulate themselves against the unpredictability of human panic and the tyranny of kings, the bankers had to evolve. A single bank was vulnerable, but a unified network of banks was invincible.
They formed cartels.
The major banking families began to form cartels. They intermarried to ensure loyalty. They shared intelligence across borders. And most importantly, they agreed to backstop each other's vaults.
So if a bank in London faced a run, the cartel in Paris would secretly ship gold across the channel to prop them up?
Precisely. And if a king decided to default on his debts, the cartel would simply pool its infinite resources to finance a rival king, arm a mercenary army, and crush the sovereign who refused to pay.
Wow.
This localized cartel system eventually formalized into the modern central banking apparatus we have today, a globally integrated network that completely monopolizes the creation of money.
So this brings us to what I think is the most painful question of the entire deep dive. If money is just digits on a screen, and if central banks can print trillions of dollars over a weekend to bail out a failing corporation or finance a war, why on earth does poverty exist?
It's a brutal question.
Why are people starving or freezing on the streets?
The material does not flinch from this question. The answer provided is incredibly dark. Poverty exists because the architects of the system actively require it to exist. Poverty is an engineered feature, not a bug.
They want it.
They absolutely rely on it. Think back to our foundation. If money is essentially infinite and completely imaginary, it has no intrinsic value. You can't need a dollar bill. It won't keep you warm.
Right.
The only way to make an imaginary currency valuable is to convince the population that it is scarce. And the most effective way to make people believe money is scarce is to publicly, visibly demonstrate the agonizing consequences of not having it.
The lectures make this so visceral. I mean, think about the conversations happening at dinner tables all over the world right now. Parents look at their children and say, you need to do your homework, you need to get a degree, you need to tolerate that abusive boss, because if you don't, you'll end up homeless on the street.
That threat loses all of its psychological power if the streets are empty.
Exactly.
If a central bank utilized its infinite capacity to guarantee a baseline standard of comfortable living for every citizen, which mathematically they could easily do, who would willingly volunteer to clean sewers for minimum wage? Who would sacrifice their physical health in a warehouse or grind away their youth in a windowless cubicle? No one.
No one would do it. The artificial scarcity of money is the mechanism that turns human sweat, human time, and human obedience into a tradable commodity. It forces you to play the game.
Now, let me anticipate your pushback here, because it's a natural one. You might argue, yes, fiat currency is an illusion, but physical resources are not. A house requires physical lumber. A sandwich requires wheat and meat. You can't just print a sandwich. Food is genuinely scarce.
Yes, exactly. I can't eat a bank ledger. Doesn't physical reality impose limits on this theory?
The lecturer addresses this exact counterargument by pointing to the sheer scale of modern global waste. They challenge the listener to visit a commercial garbage dump on the outskirts of Beijing or New York or London. Look at the staggering mountains of perfectly edible food, unsold clothing, and discarded electronics that are systematically destroyed every single day.
Supermarkets literally pouring bleach over perfectly good food in dumpsters so people can't forage it. I've seen videos of that.
Precisely. The mathematical reality of modern agriculture and manufacturing is that we produce a massive surplus. We generate more than enough caloric energy to feed every human being comfortably. Food is not scarce. The scarcity is artificially maintained by willfully destroying the surplus to protect the pricing structure and keep the treadmill running.
It's like we were all trapped in the most stressful, high-stakes game of World of Warcraft imaginable. We are running around, grinding out quests, sacrificing our relationships, having heart attacks from stress, all to earn these digital gold coins. And we do it solely because the game developers, the central bankers, have hacked our psychology to make us believe the coins are rare and vital for survival.
And to ensure the population never gets comfortable enough to stop playing the game, the system employs periodic resets. The framework argues that economic depressions, massive market crashes, and even global wars are not accidental failures of the system.
They're planned.
They are necessary release valves. When the middle class accumulates too much wealth and begins to relax, a crisis is triggered.
The stock market crashes, housing prices collapse, inflation skyrockets.
Wealth is evaporated, resources are destroyed, and the primal fear of poverty is aggressively re-injected into the cultural bloodstream. The population is forced back onto the treadmill, desperate to rebuild what was lost.
Okay, so if the entire global economy is essentially a rigged casino designed to extract human labor through the threat of artificial misery, why do we put up with it? Humans outnumber the elite 1,000,000 to 1. Why don't we just collectively realize the game is a scam, stop playing, and build something else?
Because the system is far too intelligent to wait until you're an adult to start conditioning you. To maintain an illusion of this magnitude across generations, you must capture the human mind when it's most malleable. You must break the instinct for rebellion early.
And the mechanism for that is the modern mandatory schooling system,
Yeah.
which brings us to the brainwashing engine. This segment completely upends the romanticized view of education. We assume schools exist to enlighten us, right? To pass down the accumulated wisdom of humanity. But these lectures argue that the structure of modern schooling is explicitly designed to halt natural learning.
Let's contextualize this historically. For the vast majority of human history, learning was an organic, experiential process. If a child needed to learn how to farm or weave or forge metal, they didn't sit in a room listening to a theoretical lecture about agriculture for 12 years.
No, they went out into the field with a master.
Right. They learned through observation, trial, and error. It was an apprenticeship.
The human brain is naturally incredibly curious and adept at absorbing skills when they are physically applied. So why did we abandon a highly effective natural learning method in favor of forcing children to sit silently in rigid rows for 7 hours a day?
The lectures argue it has absolutely nothing to do with education and everything to do with behavioral conditioning. Look at the historical origins of mandatory public schooling. The first 3 societies in recorded history to implement compulsory, state-run education were Sparta, the Aztec Empire, and 19th century Prussia.
Three of the most intensely militaristic, bloodthirsty, authoritarian regimes to ever exist.
Exactly. What did a Prussian general or a Spartan king need? They did not need independent, critical thinkers who would question the morality of a military campaign. They needed a massive population of deeply conditioned, obedient citizens who would stand in a straight line, march into musket fire when a bell rang, and follow orders without a second thought. The
Wow.
architecture of the school was designed to forge soldiers and compliant factory workers.
Let's really look at that architecture because it is hiding in plain sight. Think about the physical layout of a standard classroom. Desks arranged in rigid, uniform rows, all facing a single authority figure at the front. You're isolated from your peers, forbidden to collaborate, which they call cheating. And your entire biological rhythm is dictated by a bell.
The bell is purely Pavlovian. It rings, and you are conditioned to immediately stop whatever you are doing, regardless of whether you are in the middle of a profound thought, and physically move to another cell. You must literally ask for permission from the state to fulfill your basic biological need to use the restroom. This is not an environment designed to foster genius. It is a behavioral Skinner box.
But let me push back on this because I think about my elementary school teachers, and they were wonderful, kind people who genuinely cared about me. Are these lectures really suggesting that my second grade math teacher was a malicious agent of a dark empire, actively trying to brainwash me?
It's a crucial distinction, and the framework clarifies this. The individual teachers are almost always well-intentioned, caring people. They genuinely believe they are helping children.
Okay, that's a relief.
The critique is not of the individual, but of the structural design of the institution itself. The institution's parameters force the teacher to act as an enforcer of compliance, regardless of their personal warmth.
And the mechanism the institution uses to break a child's will is incredibly calculated and honestly quite heartbreaking. The lectures ask, what is the most fundamentally traumatic experience a young child can go through?
Separation from their primary caregivers.
Right. Being ripped away from their parents.
When a child of 4 or 5 years old is with their parents, they possess a secure psychological base. From that safety, they are confident, inquisitive, and naturally skeptical. If a stranger tells them something confusing, they look to their mother or father for validation. But the school system deliberately severs that bond at a highly vulnerable developmental stage.
They drop you off at a massive brick building surrounded by strangers.
Removed from their parents, the child experiences a profound instinctual terror. They are flooded with insecurity and anxiety, and human psychology dictates that a terrified child will desperately seek a new anchor of authority to feel safe. In the classroom, the child naturally, inevitably transfers their allegiance and trust to the only adult in the room, the teacher.
The psychological defenses are completely bypassed. The child's will is essentially broken, rendering them infinitely receptive to whatever reality the authority figure wants to install.
And once that compliance is secured, what is the primary illusion the school system implants? We discussed the illusion of money. The school system's primary job is to implant the illusion of the nation-state.
This was another massive paradigm shift for me. We take our nationality for granted, but the lectures point out that for almost all of human history, identity was hyperlocal. You were loyal to your family, your village, the physical land you worked.
Yes.
The idea that a peasant in a village would feel a deep blood brotherhood connection to another peasant living 500 miles away just because some king drew an arbitrary line on a map. It's absurd.
A localized, village-minded population is useless to a sprawling empire. An empire needs a population willing to pay heavy taxes and send their sons to die in distant wars. To achieve that, you have to manufacture a collective identity. Schools are the factories that produce this artificial identity.
They standardize everything.
Yes, they systematically eradicate local dialects and enforce a standardized national language. They teach a heavily curated, mythologized version of history that frames the state as a heroic, divine entity. They enforce the daily recitation of pledges or anthems. They are implanting a false collective memory.
They train you to love Mother Russia, or the United States, or France, to view a piece of cloth on a pole as something sacred. And the ultimate goal is to make you absolutely willing to serve, bleed, and die for an abstract concept, all while unquestioningly obeying the elite politicians and central bankers who manage that concept.
It is the perfect closed loop. The school conditions you to accept authority and revere the nation-state, You graduate, you enter the economy, you accept the central bank's artificial money, and you grind away your life, terrified of artificial poverty.
Now, a listener might be thinking, okay, sure, maybe that brutal conditioning was true for ancient Sparta or a 19th century factory town, but we've evolved. We live in a modern, liberal, enlightened meritocracy now.
But if you think the modern system is better, the lectures argue you are deeply mistaken.
Right. The modern American Ivy League meritocracy isn't an escape from the Prussian model. It is a far more insidious, psychologically destructive evolution of it.
Which leads us directly into the mechanics of elite reproduction. The framework's dissection of institutions like Harvard and Yale strips away all the prestige and reveals a machinery driven by pure, unadulterated self-preservation.
Let's trace the actual history of the Ivy League, because it destroys the myth of an ancient tradition of academic excellence. Initially, these places were essentially theological seminaries. Harvard was founded by Puritans to train ministers to read the Bible.
Exactly.
Over time, as America industrialized and generated massive wealth, these colleges transformed into glorified country clubs for the sons of the ultra-rich.
Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, the Ivy League was a social finishing school for the WISP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant elite. Rigorous academics were entirely secondary. The primary curriculum was socializing, drinking, playing sports, and cementing lifelong networks of power and capital.
But right around the turn of the 20th century, a massive threat to their power emerged. America started developing real, rigorous research universities based on the intense German academic model. Places like Johns Hopkins and the University of Chicago, suddenly, the truly brilliant kids, the mathematical prodigies, the scientific geniuses, were going to Chicago, not Harvard.
Harvard faced an existential crisis. If the most capable minds of the next generation gathered elsewhere, Harvard would eventually lose its monopoly on cultural and political power. They needed a mechanism to identify the smartest students across the entire country, regardless of their background, and poach them.
And their solution was to help invent the standardized test, the SAT.
The original intent of the SAT was somewhat meritocratic in theory. It was designed as an objective, purely academic sieve. Administer the test nationally, find the geniuses in rural Iowa or inner-city New York, and offer them scholarships to bring their brainpower into the Harvard fold.
But the strategy backfired catastrophically for the established elite, because when you create a purely objective, blind academic test, the results don't care about your pedigree. Suddenly, massive numbers of first-generation immigrant students, particularly Jewish students, and later Asian students, started absolutely dominating the SATs.
And the established alumni, the wealthy donors whose families had treated Harvard as a birthright for generations, revolted. Their sons were suddenly being rejected because they could not mathematically compete with these highly motivated, brilliant new demographics.
Harvard was cornered. They couldn't just overtly say, "No Jews allowed," because that would destroy their carefully curated image of enlightened academia. So they executed one of the most brilliant, deceptive, bureaucratic pivots in modern history. They invented the concept of holistic admissions.
Holistic is a term that sounds wonderfully progressive. It suggests caring about the whole person. But the lectures argue its historical implementation was explicitly exclusionary. Harvard decreed that raw intelligence, test scores, and grades were no longer sufficient.
They started demanding photographs with applications. They required personal interviews with alumni. They asked for highly subjective essays detailing a student's character and leadership potential.
By introducing these subjective, unquantifiable metrics, the admissions officers granted themselves the legal cover to reject a candidate who scored a perfect 100% on their academics, citing a nebulous lack of character or fit.
It's so insidious.
And they could simultaneously accept a legacy student who scored a 70%, praising their leadership qualities, gleaned from a polite 15-minute interview. It was a mechanism designed specifically to cap the rise of merit and protect the established hierarchy.
The system is completely rigged, and the lecturer provides a brilliant analogy to explain how an Ivy League admissions office actually functions today. We think of them as benevolent educators searching for the next generation of philosophers, but in reality, Harvard is a venture capital firm.
If you analyze their decisions through the lens of a venture capitalist managing a portfolio, the madness makes perfect sense. The VC firm's only goal is to maximize the return on investment and protect the brand's power.
So imagine the admissions committee sitting around a mahogany table. They have one spot left and 4 files in front of them. File A is a pure mathematical genius. File B is a perfect straight-A student who volunteers at the library. File C is a star quarterback. File D is a legacy kid whose grandfather donated a library. who gets the spot.
The committee discards the math genius and the perfect student. They take the legacy or the athlete. Why? Because the legacy kid is a guaranteed risk-free bond. Accepting them ensures continued millions in alumni donations and maintains the political network. The athlete brings massive media exposure and social prestige. The pure intellects offer no immediate institutional return on investment.
But what about the few spots they do save for kids outside the elite bubble? What is the venture capital strategy for the wildcard slots?
For those highly competitive non-legacy spots, they are looking for the ultimate high-risk, high-reward startup. And the key indicator they look for is not happiness or well-roundedness or a desire to do good in the world. The key indicator is deep, unresolvable psychological trauma.
They want applicants suffering from what the source literally calls dissociative personality disorder, masked as ambition. And the lecturer is brutally honest about this, using his own acceptance to Yale as the primary example.
He deconstructs his own teenage application to prove the point. He admits he was not a transcendent genius. His grades and SATs were good, but indistinguishable from tens of thousands of other applicants. His extracurriculars were fairly standard. So why did Yale choose him out of the massive pile?
Because his application screamed desperation. He was a poor immigrant who felt entirely alienated. He was so ferociously ambitious, so hungry for validation, that he actively broke the rules of his local school district to transfer to a wealthier, more prestigious high school, angering everyone around him and earning a disciplinary letter from his principal.
To a normal person, that behavior looks erratic and antisocial. But to a venture capital admissions officer, it looks like an engine that will never stop running. A well-adjusted, secure kid might graduate, make a comfortable living, prioritize their family, and be perfectly content. That kid is useless to the empire.
But a traumatized kid has a black hole in their chest. No amount of success will ever be enough to make them feel safe. If they make $1 million, their trauma tells them they need $10 million to be secure. If they become a senator, they have to be president. They view life as a ruthless, zero-sum competition.
The lectures highlight another staggering example, Johnny Kim. His resume is almost unbelievable. A Navy SEAL sniper, a Harvard Medical School doctor, and a NASA astronaut. He is the ultimate poster child for the American meritocracy.
But the lectures point out the devastating origin story driving that superhuman resume. As a teenager, Kim lived in constant terror of a violently abusive father. Ultimately, he witnessed his father killed by police in a standoff in their own home.
The framework argues that Kim's incomprehensible level of achievement is fueled by the primal, desperate need to outrun that profound childhood trauma. The Ivy League system specifically scans for, selects, and harvests this kind of pain.
Which transforms these universities into something resembling an intellectual Hunger Games. They aren't places where young minds go to explore philosophy or challenge the status quo. They are brutal arenas where the most insecure, hyper-competitive, traumatized youth on the planet are locked in a cage and forced to battle each other for artificially scarce rewards, an A grade, a spot in a secret society, a Goldman Sachs internship.
This utilitarian grinder produces a very specific type of elite. They are incredibly efficient managers, but the lectures argue they are philosophically hollow. They survive the Ivy League by learning how to morph themselves into whatever the authority figures want them to be.
And the material points to modern political figures, and again, listener, we are strictly conveying the historical critique presented in the lectures, not taking any political sides here. The source argues that figures like Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and J.D. Vance, whether they were birthed by the Ivy League or built their brands rebelling against it, are ultimately symptoms of the same soulless meritocracy.
They don't possess immovable foundational principles. They are simply apex predators in the meritocratic game, highly trained to sense what the crowd wants to hear and morph themselves to win the moment.
But this begs a massive, frustrating question. If this system is a trauma harvesting machine, if it demonstrably grinds teenagers into anxious, depressed, utilitarian robots, why do parents enthusiastically feed their children into it? Why not just pull the plug and opt out?
Because the meritocracy has executed its most brilliant psychological trick. It has convinced society that failure is literally fatal. Think about how human beings actually learn. True, deep learning requires failure. You try to ride a bike, you fall off, you scrape your knee, you adjust your balance, and you try again. Failure is the necessary friction for growth.
But in the Ivy League track, failure is not allowed. A single B- in sophomore year chemistry torpedoes your perfect GPA, which means you don't get into Stanford, which means you don't get the McKinsey internship, which means, according to the cultural narrative, your entire life is ruined.
The margin for error is zero. Consequently, students become terrified of intellectual risk. They won't take a challenging class if they aren't guaranteed an A. They become actors, flawlessly performing the role of the perfect student, completely focused on the metric rather than the knowledge.
It's an agonizing way to live, but how did we get here? How did human society evolve into a species obsessed with rigid hierarchy, constant anxiety, and endless traumatic competition? Why are we trapped in a system that demands such absolute obedience?
To answer the why, the lectures execute a massive zoom out. They leave the modern era and delve deep into the evolution of human spirituality and ancient religion. This is where the framework connects the structural oppression of modern banking and schooling directly to the theological blueprints of our ancestors.
We're going all the way back to the dawn of agriculture. The material suggests that early human spirituality was fundamentally different from what we have today. It was centered around the concept of the mother goddess.
In a nascent agricultural society, the absolute most critical concerns were the fertility of the soil and human reproduction. Survival depended on the harvest and the birth rate. Therefore, the dominant spiritual framework was womb-centric.
The imagery of this era was heavily symbolic. The goddess was often represented by a bird, signifying the heavens and the cosmic rhythms, and accompanied by a bull representing raw earthly virility.
What is vital to understand about this era, according to the lectures, is its emphasis on interconnected harmony. Because humanity was deeply tied to the seasons and astrology, the social structure was communal. The concept of rigid private land ownership did not exist. The earth belonged to everyone. Even sexuality was viewed communally, not as a possessive, jealous act, but as a sacred ritual connecting humanity to the divine fertility of the goddess.
It sounds incredibly peaceful, so what broke it? The invention of large-scale war. As populations exploded and resources tightened, tribes started attacking each other. And in these early wars, the most valuable resource you could steal from a neighboring tribe wasn't gold, it was women, to rapidly increase your own tribe's population and labor force.
The act of capturing women fundamentally altered the human psyche. It birthed the concept of humans as private property. And from the ownership of humans came the strict ownership of land, the establishment of aggressive male dominance, and the structural necessity for rigid hierarchy. The gentle harmony of the mother goddess was entirely incompatible with this violent new reality.
So, humanity replaced her with polytheism, the belief in a massive, chaotic pantheon of many gods.
Polytheism perfectly mirrored the new, chaotic era of tribal warfare. The gods of the Greeks, the Romans, or the Norse were not serene, perfect, omniscient beings sitting on clouds. They were essentially superpowered, deeply flawed humans.
Right, you read the Greek myths, and Zeus is basically a petty, jealous king with lightning bolts who spends all his time cheating on his wife and fighting with his brothers.
Exactly. And while it sounds primitive to us, the lectures argue that polytheism offered a tremendous psychological benefit. It absolved humans of existential guilt. Because the gods themselves were capricious and constantly fighting, humans didn't feel a crushing individual burden when things went wrong.
If a drought destroyed your village, you didn't assume it was because you personally were a wicked, sinful human being. You just assumed Demeter was grieving or Poseidon was angry at another god.
It maintained a buffer. It allowed communities to band together against the chaos of the gods. The primary goal of life wasn't to achieve a perfect, sinless spiritual state, but to achieve what the Greeks called eudaimonia, human flourishing, living honorably and fully in the present chaotic world.
But then the ultimate theological weapon is dropped on humanity, monotheism, the belief in one absolute, perfect, infallible God. And the lectures draw a direct causal line between the triumph of monotheism and the rise of the Roman Empire.
Consider the logistical needs of an empire. If you have conquered dozens of diverse nations, from Gaul to Egypt, you cannot manage them if everyone worships local chaotic gods. An absolute centralized empire requires one absolute centralized truth to enforce ideological order. Monotheism provided the perfect spiritual software for imperial control.
But the psychological cost to the individual was devastating. The framework argues that monotheism fundamentally broke the human capacity for collective rebellion by inventing the modern concept of the isolated individual and the crushing weight of evil.
Think about the logical trap of monotheism. If there is only one God, and that God is flawlessly perfect and entirely loving, then why is the world filled with disease, starvation, and cruelty? The fault cannot lie with God. Therefore, the fault must lie entirely, exclusively with humanity.
Before, your identity was tied to your village and the gods were to blame for the chaos. Now, your only concern is the isolated status of your immortal soul, and the misery of the world is your personal fault because you are inherently sinful.
This internalizes the oppression. If a peasant is starving under a brutal feudal lord, the monotheistic framework tells them not to rise up in revolution, but to look inward, repent for their sins, and accept their suffering as divine punishment or a test. And the lectures astutely point out that modern secular society does the exact same thing, just with different terminology.
Psychiatry. The lectures argue modern psychiatry is the secular continuation of this control. If you are deeply depressed and anxious because you work 80 hours a week in a windowless cubicle to pay off massive debt in an artificially scarce economy, the system doesn't say you are reacting normally to a toxic, oppressive environment.
No, the system says you have a chemical imbalance in your individual brain. The fault is inside you. Here's a pill to adjust your chemistry so you can be a functional, compliant worker again. It constantly forces you to look inward with guilt, preventing you from looking outward with revolutionary anger.
But the lectures reveal that the old knowledge, the belief that consciousness shapes reality, and that humanity is meant to be free, didn't just vanish. It went underground. It was preserved by secret societies and esoteric mystery schools.
These groups operated in the shadows of empires, guarding a highly subversive alternative theology. They studied texts that the Orthodox authorities violently banned and excluded from the canonical Bible, texts like the Book of Enoch or the Gnostic Gospels.
And their core theological premise is, without a doubt, the most mind-bending sci-fi concept of this entire deep dive. Prepare yourself. They don't believe the universe was created by a loving God. They believe we live in a literal prison created by a jealous monster, the Demiurge.
To understand the Demiurge, we have to look at their cosmology. The esoteric traditions posit the existence of the monad. The monad is the true, ultimate, supreme source of all pure divine energy and consciousness. It is incomprehensible perfection.
But the monad doesn't create physical matter.
Right. It emanates spiritual beings. One of these lesser cosmic emanations, named Sophia, attempted to create life on her own, without the pure, balanced energy of the monad. The result of her independent action was a cosmic abortion, a grotesque, ignorant, flawed entity known as the Demiurge.
And the Demiurge is so ignorant he doesn't even know the monad exists. He wakes up in the void, looks around, sees nothing else, and arrogantly declares, "I am the one true God, and there's none besides me."
And out of his arrogance and ignorance, the Demiurge builds the physical, material universe. The planets, the rocks, our physical bodies. According to this framework, the entire material plane is essentially a flawed, low-vibration prison designed by a monster to trap divine consciousness.
And the lectures say, look at the Old Testament. If you read it objectively, without the Sunday school filter, it reads exactly like the behavior of a jealous demiurge. What kind of perfectly loving entity demands endless blood sacrifices, drowns every man, woman, and child on earth in a flood because he's throwing a tantrum, and brutally punishes a man for collecting firewood on the wrong day of the week? The secret societies say, that's not the supreme being, that's the warden of the prison.
This theology also introduces a crucial element to explain human hierarchy, the Nephilim. The banned Book of Enoch details how certain angelic beings, the Watchers, descended into the material prison and mated with human women. Their offspring were the Nephilim.
Giant demigod hybrids.
Yes. They possessed a terrifying blend of divine intellectual power and base, earthly ambition. The framework argues that the Nephilim were the actual historical figures behind the myths of Hercules or Gilgamesh.
And here's the kicker. The lectures argue the Nephilim never left. Their genetic or spiritual descendants are the shadowy elite who sit at the absolute top of the pyramid today.
The central bankers, the architects of the Ivy League, the masters of the artificial economy.
I used an analogy when I read this to try and wrap my head around it. Imagine the Avengers. They have superpowers, right? They save the world. But imagine if, after saving the world, Captain America and Iron Man got bored, decided they liked being worshipped, and used their superpowers to permanently enslave humanity, forcing us to mine gold for them forever. The Nephilim are the corrupted Avengers of antiquity, managing the Demiurge's prison planet.
It is a profound subversive analogy that perfectly captures the esoteric worldview. And to demonstrate just how deeply this subversive theology has infiltrated our culture, the lectures turn to one of the most famous pieces of literature in history, John Milton's Paradise Lost.
Yeah. Most people assume Paradise Lost is just a beautifully written expansion of the standard Christian view. God is the hero, Satan is the villain. But the lectures argue Milton, who was a political rebel in his own time, actually embedded the secret society's ultimate truth within the poem.
The framework asks us to examine the story of the Garden of Eden through this inverted Gnostic lens. Look at the dialogue. God places humanity in a garden and strictly forbids them from eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge, warning them that the day they eat it, they will instantly die.
Then the serpent shows up. And what does Satan actually say to Eve? He tells her that God is lying. He says, you won't die. The reason God doesn't want you to eat the fruit is because it will open your eyes. You will gain the knowledge of good and evil, and your consciousness will be elevated to match his.
And the most shocking piece of evidence the lectures point out is the text of Genesis itself. The serpent actually tells the truth. Adam and Eve eat the fruit, their eyes are open, they attain knowledge, and they do not drop dead that day.
Furthermore, God panics. God explicitly says in the text, behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and live forever.
According to the secret society interpretation, the god of Eden, the Demiurge, was the tyrant desperately trying to keep humanity in a state of ignorant, blind obedience. The serpent, representing the pursuit of forbidden knowledge or gnosis, was the actual liberator, offering humanity the tool to expand their imagination and realize they were imprisoned.
It is a total violent inversion of everything we are taught about morality. Disobedience is no longer a sin. Disobedience is the first necessary step toward waking up from the matrix. But this leaves us with a terrifying reality. If we are trapped in a material prison ruled by a flawed monster and managed by Nephilim bankers who weaponize our trauma, how on earth do we get out?
This brings us to the final and most profound component of the lectures, the ultimate rebellion. If the world is a rigged game, the source points to one historical figure who provided the exact psychological mechanism to break the programming.
But the lectures are incredibly specific here. They are not talking about the Jesus of the Vatican. They are not talking about the Jesus of megachurches.
The framework draws a massive, impenetrable wall between the historical Jesus and the Jesus manufactured by the organized church. Historically, Jesus was a radical, apocalyptic street preacher in the heavily oppressed Roman province of Judea. His message was a direct, existential threat to the Roman Empire's mechanism of control.
To find the core of his true message, the lectures tell us to look away from the canonical Bible that the Romans eventually edited and look at a text discovered buried in the Egyptian desert in 1945, the Gospel of Thomas.
The Gospel of Thomas is radically different from Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. There is no narrative, there is no virgin birth, no miracles, no crucifixion story. It is simply a list of 114 secret sayings, quotes, attributed directly to Jesus.
And what Jesus says in Thomas destroys the foundation of organized religion. He doesn't say, I am the only Son of God, worship me. He says that the divine spark, a literal, uncorrupted fragment of the true supreme monad we talked about earlier, is already inside of you.
One of the most famous quotes from Thomas encapsulates this entirely. The kingdom is inside of you, and it is outside of you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will become known, and you will realize that it is you who are the sons of the living Father.
He is teaching the exact same universal mystical truth as Plato or Buddha, that human consciousness originates from a pure divine source, and that the material world of empires, banks, and physical bodies is a temporary illusion.
The subversive nature of this message cannot be overstated. Think about the Roman Empire at its peak. Massive, imposing stone aqueducts, brutal colosseums, vast legions of soldiers, and total economic domination through taxation. They commanded reality.
And Jesus stands up in the dirt of Judea and says, whoever has come to understand the world has found only a corpse. He looks at the might of Rome and calls it a dead body, a hallucination. He tells the poorest, most broken slaves that the empire has absolutely zero power over their internal spark.
This is precisely the mechanism of his rebellion, and it is exactly why the Romans had to torture and execute him. Roman authority relied entirely on the twin pillars of control we've discussed, making the population fear physical death and making them desire material wealth. Jesus neutralized both.
He taught that the rich and powerful, the Roman elites, the emperors, were not to be envied, they were to be deeply pitied.
Because to climb to the apex of the Demiurge's material pyramid, you have to commit unspeakable violence against your own soul. You must betray, oppress, and murder. The lectures use the literary analogy of Achilles in the Iliad. After Achilles brutally murders Hector and desecrates his body by dragging it behind a chariot, Achilles cannot sleep. He is weeping, haunted, and psychologically shattered by his own cruelty.
Jesus taught that the rulers of the world are tormented by their own internal demons. They are the most trapped people on earth. Meanwhile, a slave, stripped of all earthly possessions and titles, still possesses an immaculate, untouchable divine spark and is therefore the only one who is truly free.
This profound psychological shift is the foundation of Jesus' most radical and most misunderstood command. Love your enemies. Forgive those who persecute you.
We usually hear that and think it just means be a nice person, but the lectures argue it is a highly advanced tactical weapon.
It is absolute psychological warfare against the elite. If a Roman soldier strikes you and you respond with hatred and violence, you are playing by their rules. You are validating their physical power. But if you look at your oppressor with genuine pity, if you forgive them because you recognize they are spiritually diseased and trapped in an illusion, you utterly break their power over you.
You refuse to let their evil dim your spark. You expose the terrifying might of the empire as nothing more than a pathetic, meaningless corpse.
But this revelation introduces a massive historical paradox. If Jesus' true original mission was to teach radical individualism, to reject earthly hierarchy, and to explicitly tell people they do not need priests, temples, or dogma because the divine is inside them,
Then why, 2,000 years later, are there 2 billion Christians following massive, heavily organized, wealthy, hierarchical religious institutions? How did the ultimate rebellion turn into the ultimate establishment?
the lectures answer this contradiction by turning to literature. Specifically, Fyodor Dostoevsky's masterpiece, The Brothers Karamazov, and the famous chapter known as The Grand Inquisitor. It is perhaps the greatest philosophical critique of institutional religion ever written.
Let me set the stage for this story, because it is brilliant and terrifying. Dostoevsky imagines that Jesus actually returns to Earth, but he doesn't return in glory in the clouds. He quietly walks into the streets of Seville, Spain, during the absolute height of the Spanish Inquisition. Fires are burning heretics in the squares.
Jesus walks silently through the crowd. He performs miracles. He heals a blind man. He raises a young girl from the dead. The people instantly recognize him. They weep. They adore him. But the leader of the church, the aged, cynical Grand Inquisitor, sees this happening.
And what does the leader of the church do when he sees the Savior return? He immediately orders his guards to arrest Jesus and throw him in a dark dungeon.
Late that night, the Grand Inquisitor visits Jesus in his cell, and he delivers a blistering, devastating monologue explaining exactly why the church is going to burn Jesus at the stake the next morning.
The Inquisitor looks at Jesus and says, "You made a massive miscalculation when you were on Earth. You offered humanity free will. You told them they had the divine spark and that they had to seek the truth for themselves, without rules or miracles to force them."
The Inquisitor argues that pure free will is an agonizing burden. The responsibility of individual choice, of having to navigate the universe without a rigid map, causes humanity immense psychological terror. The Inquisitor says to Jesus, humans don't want freedom, they want bread, and they want someone to tell them what to do.
The Inquisitor proudly confesses that the church had to step in and fix Jesus' mistake. The church took away the terrifying burden of freedom and replaced it with 3 pillars of control: miracle, mystery, and authority. They built a rigid, hierarchical system with strict rules so the masses could just surrender their will and be comfortable, happy sheep.
The Grand Inquisitor essentially admits that the institutional church is not working for God. They are working with the Demiurge, or Satan, to enforce worldly order, because humanity is too weak to handle the fierce, burning responsibility of the divine spark.
It's the ultimate defense of the Matrix. The Inquisitor is saying, we know it's an illusion, but the illusion keeps them safe and warm, and you are trying to wake them up into the freezing cold of reality. And how does Jesus respond to this incredibly logical, cynical defense of tyranny?
Throughout the entire monologue, Jesus never says a single word. He doesn't argue theology. He doesn't call down fire from heaven. When the Inquisitor finally finishes speaking and waits for a response, Jesus simply steps forward and gently kisses the old, bloodless lips of the Inquisitor.
And the Inquisitor is completely shattered. The pure, unadulterated act of pity and forgiveness breaks his rigid logic. He leaves the door of the cell open and tells Jesus to leave and never come back.
It perfectly illustrates the historical tragedy. Jesus' method, pure love and individual responsibility, shatters the machinery of power. But the machinery of power is comfortable, and humanity continually chooses the comfort of the prison over the terror of freedom.
But this still leaves us with a theological puzzle that the lectures must address. If Jesus' true message was entirely about finding the spark inside you, why did he have to be brutally tortured and crucified? Mainstream Christianity teaches that his death was a transaction, a blood sacrifice to pay a debt to an angry God for human sin.
The esoteric framework vehemently rejects this transactional view. The idea that the supreme monad requires a bloody murder to forgive humanity makes no sense. Instead, the lectures turn to Dante's Divine Comedy for a profound philosophical explanation of the crucifixion, centered entirely around the concept of free will.
According to Dante, the absolute greatest gift God could ever give humanity was free will. If God simply forced us to be good, if he programmed us like robots to never make a mistake, we would have no capacity for true love, true growth, or genuine imagination. We would just be stagnant code.
But the terrible cost of free will is that humanity inevitably chooses to do evil. We eat the fruit, we oppress each other, we build the artificial hierarchies, and this creates a cosmic dilemma. Humanity has committed evil, but we are too small to ever truly repay the debt to the universe.
So humanity is stuck, but God is also stuck. If God just waves a magic wand and casually forgives everyone, then free will is meaningless. There are no consequences, so humanity learns nothing and will just keep doing evil forever.
To explain the profound solution to this paradox, the lecturer uses a poignant, emotional analogy. Imagine a loving father who has a young daughter and a beloved dog. He loves them both deeply. One day, the daughter, acting out of a dark impulse of jealousy to test her father's love, intentionally kills the dog.
The father is trapped in an impossible situation. If he savagely beats his daughter to punish her, he proves that he loved the dog more, and he breaks his relationship with his child. But if he just hugs her and says, "It's okay, I forgive you," the daughter learns absolutely nothing about the gravity of taking a life, and she might grow up to be a monster.
So how does the father break the cycle without violating his love for his daughter or ignoring justice? The father takes a whip, hands it to his daughter, and commands her to whip him. Or he punishes himself in front of her.
The daughter is forced to witness the immense agonizing pain she has caused the father she loves. The emotional devastation of seeing him suffer for her crime generates a remorse so profound, so earth-shattering, that her soul is permanently altered. She is humbled forever, and she never commits the crime again.
This, the lecturers argue, is the true meaning of the crucifixion. God did not demand a blood sacrifice from humanity to satisfy his wrath. The Supreme Being, manifesting in the physical avatar of Jesus, voluntarily endured the absolute worst torture that Demiurge's empire could inflict. He punished himself in front of humanity.
It was an act of extreme cosmic humility. By witnessing the ultimate sacrifice, by seeing the divine submit to the brutality of the material world without fighting back, humanity is meant to be shaken to its core. It is designed to inspire a remorse that breaks the cycle of human pride and evil, guiding us back toward the light without ever violating our precious free will.
It is a breathtakingly beautiful, tragic logic. But the material acknowledges a harsh truth. Even with that profound example, taking total responsibility for your own divine spark is incredibly difficult. It is terrifying to step outside the safety of the institution. It is much easier to let the school, the bank, or the church give you a rule book and tell you exactly what to do.
And most of us fail. We get sucked into the rat race. We obsess over the Ivy League resume. We stress about the artificial money. We let the Demiurge's system dim our spark. If we only have one short life, it seems incredibly unfair.
Which is why the final piece of the esoteric framework is the concept of infinite reincarnation, the belief that the physical body is merely a temporary vessel. If you fail in this lifetime, if you become consumed by the utilitarian meritocracy, if you live in fear, it is not an eternal damnation.
Death is just a reset button on the console.
Exactly. The spark returns to the source, evaluates the lessons learned through failure, and tries again. The framework suggests you have thousands, perhaps millions of lifetimes to make mistakes, to experience the friction of the material prison, and to slowly, gradually awaken to the realization that true wealth is not accumulated digits in a central bank or the prestige of a Harvard degree. True wealth is the expansion of your inner consciousness through love, creativity, and the relentless pursuit of genuine knowledge.
What a monumental, wild journey we've been on today. Let's try to pull all these massive threads together. We started by questioning the very fabric of our physical reality, using Kant to realize that time, space, and the so-called objective laws of science are largely constructs of our own imagination.
We examined how the elite weaponized that imagination, utilizing the alchemy of fractional reserve banking to turn paper contracts into infinite money, while deliberately engineering the misery of artificial poverty to force humanity onto an endless treadmill of labor.
We looked at the true function of the school system, seeing it not as a place of enlightenment, but as an architectural and psychological engine designed to break a child's will, sever their connection to their parents, and implant an artificial loyalty to the nation-state.
We dissected the Ivy League meritocracy, exposing its holistic admissions as a venture capital strategy that selects for deeply traumatized, insecure youth, grinding them into anxious, utilitarian managers to run the system.
And we trace this all back to a cosmic spiritual battle. From the peaceful harmony of the mother goddess to the rise of patriarchal polytheism to the centralizing control of monotheistic empires. We explored the terrifying esoteric belief that our material world is a prison constructed by an ignorant demiurge managed by the descendants of the Nephilim.
Yet, against all of these massive, entrenched structures of control, the framework points to the subversive, anti-authoritarian message of the historical Jesus. A reminder that an uncorrupted fragment of the divine, the spark, resides within each individual. A spark that can only be ignited by radical love, pity for the oppressor, and a steadfast refusal to play by the rules of the empire.
The overarching theme tying all of this together is the constant grinding tension between the artificial, rigid structures imposed by power and the organic, terrifying freedom of the individual human spirit. The lectures insist that while this material matrix is designed to test you, to break you, the very act of existing within it, making mistakes, feeling the pain, and trying again is exactly how the universe expands its own imagination.
It forces a profound reevaluation of every moment of friction in your life. It challenges you to rethink every time you have felt the crushing weight of failure because you didn't achieve a specific societal milestone.
Which brings us perfectly back to where we started, the idea of the X-ray machine. Usually when we look at an X-ray of a broken arm, we are looking for the fracture, the flaw. We are looking for the thing that is wrong with us, so we can fix it and get back to normal.
But if you take away anything from this massive framework, it should be the realization that the X-ray machine itself is part of the illusion. The metrics we use to measure our success, our worth, and our failures, the balance in our bank accounts, the letters on our report cards, our position in the corporate hierarchy, are instruments calibrated by a system that actively requires your ongoing anxiety in order to function.
So here's a final thought to take with you long after you stop listening today. Think about your own life. The next time you fail at something, whether you bomb a crucial test, lose a job you desperately needed, or fall short of a goal you thought defined, you don't just automatically bow your head and accept the guilt.
Ask yourself a deeper question. Are you failing the artificial rigged rules of the Demiurge's meritocracy? Or are you, through the messy, painful, unpredictable reality of your human experience, simply doing the work of expanding the imagination of the universe?
What if the system isn't punishing you because you are weak? What if your biggest, most painful failure is exactly the jolt your divine spark needed to finally wake up?